Good evening, and welcome to Halifax Water's virtual stormwater information session for the Tantallon, St. Margaret's Bay area. My name's Kenda McKenzie. I'm the Director of Regulatory Services with Halifax Water, and tonight I'll be walking through some of the format around stormwater billing, what it means to you as a resident potentially, and just an overall Q&A on some of the questions that we hear most frequently when it comes to the stormwater charge and the proposed expansion of the service boundary. Tonight with me, you can see we have some agenda here in front of us. Tonight with me is Kathy O'Toole, the General Manager of Halifax Water. Siju Matthew, who is the project manager for the stormwater expansion. Jeff Myrick, who is our communications manager. And Mark McGonnell, who is our stormwater operations engineer. So we're going to go through our presentation about the pending expansion. We will then have an ability to do typed questions in a Q&A format. And behind the scenes, I forgot to mention Jake Fulton. You may hear his voice, and he will probably be troubleshooting any technical issues and making sure that your questions are captured as part of the Q&A. After we go through some of the typed questions, we'll have raise hand function ability to have people turn on their microphone and ask questions where we can have some dialogue on some of the things that you hear tonight or some of the questions that you have about how stormwater billing is going to occur. We do ask that everyone is respectful in making their comments and posing their questions. And if we do encounter anybody using disrespectful language or tones, we will have to unfortunately mute that person for the remainder of the session. So we just ask for everybody's cooperation in that. And we also want to make sure that you're aware that we are recording this session. So if there's anything that in a personal information format or nature that you do not wish to have published online, please refrain from using that or stating it in any of your Q&A when we get to that point of the presentation. So thank you, and we're just going to go to the next slide. And there is some instruction there. If you want to submit a typed question, you should be able to see a question mark on the tab. Click on that, and then you'll be able to type in your question, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. And then at the end of the presentation, as we said, we'll have a verbal ability to do Q&A and just have some dialogue on anything that you've seen tonight or anything that you've heard over the past months as we tried to communicate with the residents. And we'll be able to unmute your microphone and be able to take your questions and comments at that point. Thank you. Next slide. So we're just going to do the review of the stormwater management expansion boundary for Area 1. And next slide, please. So the big question is, why is Halifax Water responsible for stormwater management? Back in 2007, the municipality transferred the responsibility for wastewater and stormwater services to Halifax Water to ensure that the services are going to be properly funded, the infrastructure will be upgraded and managed, and be able to provide the appropriate level of services for the residents within the municipality. The stormwater service boundary originates from road ownership boundaries that were set by the province in an HRM, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. In July, Halifax Regional Council approved the acceptance for additional roads as part of a transfer agreement with the province. And because of the pre-existing agreements made in 2007, Halifax Regional Municipality requested that Halifax Water assume responsibility for the management and delivery of the stormwater service in the proposed expansion areas. As part of Halifax Water's structure, we are required to take this proposal of the expanded boundary to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. And we are currently requesting the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board review our application and approve the service expansion to areas 1 and 4. Next slide, please. So what is Halifax Water's role and why why we charge rates? Excuse me. Halifax Water is an integrated water utility that operates as not-for-profit, and it's regulated by the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. HRM transferred the wastewater and stormwater responsibility to us in 2007. And as a result, Halifax Water is obligated to provide stormwater service and accept assets when provincial road infrastructure is transferred to HRM, as is going to occur in June of 2022. Halifax Water, the way we're structured, are through the Utility Review Board, we're required to recover costs when we provide service to a customer for water, wastewater, or stormwater. And we cannot cross-subsidize any of these services. And basically that means if we collect any rates for water service, we cannot use that money to fund a wastewater project or a stormwater project, and vice versa. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what we've done for communications with some of the property owners in your community about this proposed expansion. So in October, we made our application to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board to expand the boundary to include Area 1. In late October, we notified the property owners within the area via address letters to advise them of the pending expansion and the process with the Utility Review Board. In November, letters were sent to invite residents to attend some in-person sessions, and we also used social media and some newspaper ads to try and promote these in-person sessions. We did host 4 sessions in the communities of Upper Tantallon, Lewis Lake, and head of St. Margaret's Bay, and approximately about 100 people attended those 4 sessions, first end of November, 1st of December. One of the things that came to light when we held those sessions was we had some delays in some of our deliveries of the notices of the invitation to the sessions. And as a result, we committed to have sessions in January to try and expand the audience of the residents so that they knew about the expansion and what it entailed. And we had hoped to have some in person again, but as everyone knows, COVID has caused us to go to a virtual platform. We also had a session on Tuesday as part of a town hall with Councillor Pamela Lovelace hosting us. So in January, we did send out additional notices to residents or through newspaper ads to promote these virtual sessions. So we're having one tonight, and then in Area 4, which is the East Preston, Lawrencetown communities, we will be having a second session there. And so here we are tonight for our online sessions. And we just want to highlight that even after tonight, if you still have questions, we have a number of resources on our website, and there's also contact information. And if you have a question or inquiry, want to get an email response or a phone call, you can go to our website and reach out to our customer care center, and your call will be directed to the appropriate staff member. Next slide, please. So the expanded area is shown here in the yellow, and I'm going to ask Jake if he can try and hover over. We apologize for the size of the font, but the line that goes out along here is basically the 103. So the current boundary is the orange colored area. And so for perspective, you have the 103 there, and it would go basically to encompass some of the areas along St. Margaret's Bay Road, and down to through the head of the bay down to Boutiliers Point area. And so the orange area is what when I reference previous road expansions, that was a boundary that was established in 2006 based on road transfer from the province to the municipality at the time. And in creating this yellow boundary, staff at HRM worked with the province and with ourselves to look at what made sense on a number of areas to provide efficient service to the residents of these communities. One of the determining factors were community boundaries and trying to align with those. Also, HRM was looking at setting the boundaries to provide efficient snow service and garbage collection for these communities, as well as taking into consideration some of the drainage boundaries that would exist with existing infrastructure. And so we collaborated with HRM on what made sense for Halifax Water in providing stormwater service efficiently and effectively in this new area. Next slide, please. So one of the big questions we get, what does stormwater include? So basically we view stormwater as precipitation of all kinds. It will include rain, melting snow, ice, groundwater discharge, and surface water. And one of the key factors in trying to maintain and manage stormwater is being mindful of the fact that it will run off from impervious surfaces such as roofs, parking lots, driveways, and other hard surfaces. And we consider those, and we'll get into those a bit, how they impact the bill. We do acknowledge that through the hydrologic cycle that some water will re-enter into the ground as part of groundwater recharge. Next slide, please. So why does stormwater management matter? Basically, because of the hard surfaces that we see throughout our communities, pavement, packed gravel, roofs, they will prevent precipitation from naturally soaking into the ground. And if that stormwater is not managed properly, this runoff from these impervious areas could cause flooding and damage to public and private property and infrastructure during precipitation events. One of the other factors in considering good stormwater management is some of the things that we're seeing these days with climate change, and it increases the risk that to damage to property and infrastructure if not managed properly. Next slide, please. So one of the things that when we get a lot of inquiries about how properties receive service, we try to communicate about what is stormwater management. And one of the big factors is when a system is designed, and so when catch basins, pipes, ditches, culverts are sized and where they're located, they're done so in a manner to make sure that they capture and are large enough to convey stormwater that will flow from all of the area that would be tributary to that system. So that's key in doing the design aspects of a stormwater system, making sure that we can maintain and can capture all of that water. The other key factors in good stormwater management is operating and maintaining the system so that it's controlled, the stormwater, once it gets to it, is controlled to reduce the impacts of the rainwater or the melted snow and run off into the streets, yards, and other sites. One of the factors too when designing stormwater systems is to keep in mind that, as I said, some water will go back into the ground as part of groundwater recharge. However, in certain events, when you have a number of days of continuous rain, the ground may become saturated, or on days like today where the ground is frozen, you don't see that recharge happening as readily. And that saturated or frozen ground would create, basically simulate hard surfaces again and increase the runoff that will be coming from properties that will ultimately make it to streams, rivers, lakes, wetlands, or the ocean. Next slide, please. So Halifax Water provides service to tens of thousands of customers. And we do so with a number of different infrastructure components. There are ditches, culverts, driveway culverts, and cross culverts. We have catch basins, and which you see predominantly in the urban area. However, there are some catch basins on some of the streets within this community. There's also a series of manholes that you'll see in the streets and underground pipes that are conveying the stormwater. We also have a number of retention ponds or holding tanks, and basically those serve the purpose of retaining that peak runoff during major storm events so that the downstream systems don't become overtaxed. Next slide, please. So what is the value for Halifax Water stormwater customers? So as we mentioned, it is essential to manage stormwater so that your property, public infrastructure and roads are properly drained and the water flows away from them and gets conveyed to a receiving water. Because we want to make sure that the roads are passable as much as possible during heavy rain events. And also stormwater management is critical to protection of the environment. When Halifax Water provides stormwater service to an area, the service is set up and established so that routine inspections on the systems are done to make sure that they're functioning properly. We will monitor and remove any blockages that may occur in ditch systems, in culverts, catch basins, pipes underground. And we will conduct necessary repairs in ditches and culverts. And this is inclusive of driveway culverts. One of the big things that a lot of people may not be fully aware of is that the driveway culvert that is adjacent to the road to allow you to enter onto your property, although you may have placed it or the developer of your property may have placed it, it becomes part of the infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure associated with that street. And as such, it is owned by a public entity. And so if there are problems with the driveway culvert in the future, in areas where Halifax Water provides service, we will be responsible for replacing failed infrastructure and ensuring that it's clear of any blockages. Next slide, please. Another big question that arises is who's responsible for what? And with this pending road transfer, it's slated to happen June 1st of 2022. If the UARB approves it, Halifax Water would then become responsible for the stormwater infrastructure management that I outlined previously. And we do want to note too, a lot of questions pop up about the vegetation that may exist in ditches. And if the vegetation is providing, is not impeding the flow of water in the ditch, it's left in place. I know some people would like it to be removed for aesthetic reasons, but if it's not causing any blockages or obstructions, it's not removed from the ditch. With HRM assuming responsibility for the roads from the province in June, they would be responsible for maintenance of the roads, so future paving programs, those types of things, shoulder maintenance, if there's any washout on the shoulders, bridges, and basically a bridge is a span of 3 meters or wider. And they're also responsible for roadside access, visibility and sight lines at intersections near signs or around curves, and any non-stormwater assets in the right-of-way. So street signs, street lights, those types of things would become the responsibility of the municipality. And then going again to the vegetation example, if vegetation is growing up at a road intersection, two streets intersect and it's impacting sight lines, that's when HRM may come in and cause or remove some of the vegetation to improve the sightline issue that may exist. Next slide, please. So getting into some of the factors and how we determine the charge. Going back to some of the previous notes about what is an impervious surface or hard area. And basically it's any surface on a property that is covered with asphalt, concrete, hard packed gravel, or the roof of your house or shed or anything like that that may exist on your property. Halifax Water uses satellite imagery to determine how much impervious area exists on each property within the proposed boundary. And so we are finishing up collection and quality control and checks on that information for your community right now. Next slide, please. The second part of the process is looking at where does the stormwater go from each property. Once we know that there's impervious area on the property, we use basically contour mapping and drainage mapping to determine, does that water leave your property and enter into a Halifax Water stormwater system? If it does, you are considered as receiving service and would be considered a customer. And one of the highlights that we want to bring forward here is that regardless of whether there's a ditch in front of your property or a culvert in front of your property, you may still be receiving service. And basically that means that water could flow from your property, out the side of your property, across your neighbors, or out the back. And if ultimately the water makes its way to a drainage infrastructure component that belongs to Halifax Water, you would be considered being a customer. And this goes back to the point that I made earlier about when a stormwater system is designed, consideration has to be given to all of the lands that would ultimately drain to that infrastructure component. And basically there's a cross section here that shows typically in more urban settings, you would have catch basins and pipes. And typically, again, in rural areas, you would have ditches and culverts, but there are exceptions to both of those. Next slide, please. So once we've captured what your impervious area is, and if we've determined that water flows from your property to Halifax Water System, we then take the area of the impervious area of your property, and we will place your property within one of the 5 tiers that you see here. And the charges for the tiers basically range from $0 to $81 under our current rate structure. You'll also see at the bottom, we have properties that have less than 50 square meters, or the impervious area drains away to an ocean or a lake and never touches Halifax Water infrastructure. But they may have a driveway culvert that we would be responsible to maintain and replace if it was to fail or become damaged. Those customers would receive an annual bill of $14 from Halifax Water for the future replacement of the culvert. So in looking at the 4 tiers, to give some perspective, I have a 2-acre property. I'm on well and septic, and my house is 1,200 square foot footprint, and it has a 24 by 24 garage, and my driveway is probably about 100 feet off of the road. And when you add up all of my impervious area for my property, it places me in a tier 4. So my bill that I receive from Halifax Water for the impervious area that drains to our system is $54 a year. Now going over to the next column, you'll see the annual HRM right-of-way charge. And basically in 2013, when Halifax Water took the initial application to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board to establish the stormwater boundary and the charges at that time, the Utility Review Board looked at how we were applying the charges for the impervious area. And one of the key frameworks and principles in establishing charges through the Utility Review Board is looking at who is generating who's receiving the service or having an impact on the system that we operate and maintain. And in that case, the Utility Review Board viewed HRM as a customer, as having impervious area that would be receiving service from the stormwater system. And so essentially, if we take those principles and apply their impervious area, the bill that we send to HRM annually is a little over $3 million. And when that was established, HRM requested that Halifax Water collect the right-of-way charge on their behalf from the customers that we were sending our site-related flow charge to. So when you look at the cost that's being applied to HRM and the number of customers, that works out to be $40 per customer. So when you receive a bill from Halifax Water, you will be receiving a bill that shows the value for your impervious area based on the tier that you're in. And you will also see on your bill the $40 for your share of the right-of-way charge that is sent and applied to HRM. So going back to my example, annually I would receive a bill from Halifax Water for a total of $94. Next slide, please. And just to give you a sense for the customers that we have that do receive stormwater charge from us and stormwater service. They would get their bill and there would be a line item for site-related flow charge, and that would be based on the $14 to $81. And there would also be a line item for the right-of-way charge, which would be $40 under the current rate structure. Next slide, please. So when we hosted some of these in-person sessions, there was a number of common questions that kept popping up. And so we thought we would include those in this presentation tonight just to help provide a more round response to what's going on and hopefully head off some of your questions or address some of your questions that you may be thinking about. One of the questions that we received was, does this mean that water and wastewater services are coming to my area? And the answer is no. Stormwater service is unrelated to water and water service. However, there is a process through the local improvement charge bylaw that if a community wanted to be considered for extension of water or wastewater service to their developed area, they can make a request through their councillor to HRM staff. And the request would be investigated and reviewed and determined whether or not it's feasible, and also what the charges would be for that community to receive that service. Next slide, please. Another question that popped up, and especially in this area, this community, there's a number of private roads. And a lot of people were asking, if I'm on a private road and I don't have any, or I don't have public road frontage, could I still become a customer? And the answer is yes. Going back to the notes that I mentioned earlier, where water can leave your property through the rear or the side, and ultimately, even though you may be on a private road or driveway, long driveway that has private infrastructure on it for stormwater, if water leaves your property and gets to a Halifax Water stormwater infrastructure system, you would become a customer. The other aspect of this that we want to highlight is that the private road may be on its own individual parcel, and it may be owned by a homeowners association and or a number of residents that use the private road to access their properties. If the private road itself, that parcel, if that drains to Halifax Water infrastructure, it would be considered as receiving service, and a bill would be applied to that parcel and to the owners of the parcel itself. Next slide, please. Another big question that has been coming up even with the initiation of the charge in 2013. A lot of people, if they don't have a ditch or a culvert in front of their property, they want to know, can I become a customer? Will I become a customer, or how do I become a customer? And the answer is yes, you can be a customer without a ditch or a culvert in front of your property. And it goes back to the same concepts and principles that if stormwater leaves your property and eventually gets to a stormwater infrastructure component, you would become a customer. And another thing that came up when we were having our sessions, some residents thought that their bill would be based on the frontage of their property. And the frontage does not come into the determination of the bill. It goes back to the tiering system that I explained, and it's based on the impervious area that you have on your property. Next slide, please. Another big question, especially where there's a lot of coastal properties in this area. Water from my property may flow directly to a lake or an ocean. Could I still become a customer? So in doing our assessments of each property, we're going to go and look and see if any water could leave your property and ultimately drain to Halifax Water infrastructure. If no water at any point would enter into our system, you will not become a customer and you would not receive a bill. However, we do highlight, though, if your property is configured such that you have a driveway culvert where it meets the road, you would be assessed the annual $14 culvert-only customer charge and the HRM right-of-way charge. Next slide, please. Another big question was, when will I know if I'm going to become a customer? And so at this point, we are still collecting all the data and analyzing it to confirm whether stormwater is leaving your property and entering our stormwater system or not. And our intentions are to provide all residents in the communities with a letter advising whether or not you will become a customer or whether you'll be considered being exempt. If it is determined you will be receiving service, we will provide information on what tier we anticipate you will be placed into when the time comes. We're hoping to have these letters out in the summertime, and if approved and we start providing service June 1st, the first set of bills would not be sent out to the future customers until January to April of 2023. And so you may see some of our blue trucks in the area lately. Staff have been out getting information on the culverts, the size, the location, and those types of things to help us in determining who will be a customer and who will not. Next slide, please. Another question that has arisen quite a bit, even again since 2013, where the charge is being assigned to those that are considered as being customers. A number of people are asking, with the road transfer from the province to the municipality, am I going to receive or see a reduction in my taxes? And we just want to highlight provincial income taxes are sent by the province and property taxes are established by the municipality. Halifax Water is not involved in either of those taxation frameworks or processes. The transfer of the infrastructure is a result of an agreement that exists with the province and HRM. These service exchanges have occurred in the past, with the last one being in 2006, which has formed and established today's stormwater boundary. No funding for stormwater services being transferred from HRM or transferred to HRM or Halifax Water as part of this transfer. Part of the agreement that is mentioned above between the province and HRM, the province has agreements with other municipalities, and the municipalities pay the province for road maintenance on those streets within their region. However, the agreement that HRM has is that it was exempt from the costs for providing maintenance to the provincial roads, provided that HRM would assume responsibility for roads once a community reached a specified density. So once the population in a community got to a certain size, HRM would then become responsible for the streets within that area. And of note, when this process was initiated, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, there were 4 areas being considered. And HRM evaluated all 4 areas, and only 2 of the 4 were considered as reaching the specified density threshold, and those are the only 2 areas that are being considered as part of the transfer from the province to HRM, and ultimately for Halifax Water to assume responsibility for the stormwater service in those 2 areas. Next slide, please. So what will Halifax Water do when it takes over stormwater service in 2022 if this is approved by the Utility Review Board? Our primary goal will be to ensure that stormwater systems continue to function and avoid damage to roads and private property. If stormwater infrastructure is working properly and does not jeopardize roads or driveways or private property, you will see little change to those physical aspects of the systems. We will operate and maintain the existing infrastructure. One of the questions that we've received quite a bit is people are concerned that we're going to go into existing communities and install new systems that are up to current or newer standards, and they might not quite fit into the aesthetics of the community that they live in today. And so our intentions are to continue to operate the existing infrastructure as it is today, and as long as it's functioning as intended, it will remain, and we'll make sure that it remains clear of any blockages. However, if there are issues, we will conduct investigations, and if maintenance is required, we will undertake that appropriate maintenance. Another question that has arisen in some of the previous sessions, if there's chronic water runoff problems or ponding problems, Halifax Water and HRM will investigate, and the appropriate agency will undertake any required work And if no work is required, or it's pre-existing issues that aren't impacted by publicly owned infrastructure, we will communicate that to the property owners. Next slide, please. So one of the other big things, if you receive, if you're determined to be a customer and you receive a bill from us and you don't agree, or you don't understand how you become a customer, you don't understand how we've evaluated your property and determined that water from your property leaves your property and gets to our system, you can informally reach out to us through our call center, and Mark McGonnell will be probably the person getting back to you to review how your property receives service. If you still don't agree with how we've assessed your property, we have a formal process of appeals, and it's called a notice of objection. And you can contact us, and we will write a formal letter to you and detail how you are getting service. If you still don't agree with that outcome, we have a dispute resolution officer, which is a third party, and you can contact, and the information is on our website on how you contact that person to provide your concerns and why you think you do not receive stormwater service. The dispute resolution officer will assess the file, gather information from yourself and from us, and determine whether or not we've applied our regulations and methodology appropriately in determining whether or not you receive service. If you still don't agree, or if we don't agree with the outcome from the dispute resolution officer, either of us can go to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board within 30 days and create an appeal to the Utility Review Board on the outcome of the dispute resolution officer's decision. And all of the information is available on our website for this process. Next slide, please. So a bit of the timeline, and I apologize, there's a lot of words here, but we just wanted to capture some of the key dates that have been of interest in getting us to this point. In July 2021, the proposed roads from the province, there was a transfer proposed from the province to HRM. And later in that month, HRM approved that transfer. And then HRM formally requested that Halifax Water take on responsibility for the stormwater assets within areas 1 and 4. In September, we started conducting assessments of the infrastructure, gathering data. In October, we submitted our application to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board for the extension of the boundary as it exists today. We then commenced communications with the property owners within the two areas in October, and again further in November. And then we had our in-person sessions in November and December. In January, we sent out notices inviting people to attend these in virtual sessions where we couldn't have in-person sessions anymore. Next slide, please. And in those notifications that we sent out, I did note that we had a session earlier this week with Councillor Lovelace's community town hall session. But in the notices that went out about these virtual sessions, we highlighted that yesterday was the deadline for letters of comment to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. And that basically was anyone that wanted to make comment about the proposed expansion could submit letters, and a number of letters were received by the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. And then tonight and Monday, we have our virtual sessions. And we'll be filing a next document with the Utility Review Board as part of the process on February 9th. And it's basically a rebuttal whereby we will try and address and bring forward information to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board and some of the things that we've heard from these sessions, and outline some of the steps that we took in communicating with the residents of the two communities, as well as giving the board an update on our data collection and assessment of whether or not people are customers or not. And This is with the goal of the board having all the information that they need to commence what is called a paper hearing. There will not be, at this point, there is no proposal for an in-person or virtual hearing. And the intention is June 1st, 2022, subject to the board ruling on the transfer, we would begin providing service to the communities located in Area 1 and 4. And as we noted earlier, later in 2022, we are hoping to communicate with the residents in the two communities, advising them whether or not they receive service and whether or not they will become a customer. And then the intention is to include on that communication what tier or charge you should expect when the bills are issued in between January and April of 2023. Next slide. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm just going to check with Jake to see if we have some questions that we want to address that were typed in, or if it's open the floor time.
We have not received any typed questions. I will pull up the slide here to display again how to raise your hand if you'd like the opportunity to turn on your microphone and ask a question. Please feel free to do so. Right, Mark and Lisa, I will grant you access to turn on your mic.
Hi there. I just wanted to inquire, so is the bill, are we paying for services we've had, like will we be paying for like ahead for the services we're going to have for the year, or is it, are we paying after we've received it for a year?
You would be paying after you receive the service for a year.
Okay, so if it starts in June, then we won't get a bill until June of 2023?
I'm going to ask Saju Matthew to explain the billing process for us.
So the way we do our billing services is that you get the service first and then we bill you for that service. And our bills for stormwater are annual and generally goes from April 1st to March 31st. But because the service is expected to start on June 1st, 2022, right, the bill would be prorated for June 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023. And okay, so the first year, the bill will be about 10 months. And then every year after that, it will be one full year.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I don't see any other raised hands, but we have received two written questions, so I'll read one from Patrick Sullivan. The question, is there a current problem with the current culvert system? When do we expect it will be repaired?
So if I understand the question correctly, if you currently have a problem culvert or an issue with your drainage, right now in Area 1, the province is still responsible for providing service until June. Once if we're given permission to start service in June, if you make our call center aware of the issue, it would get triaged, and depending on the nature of the issue, either Mark will go out and do an investigation to determine what work has to occur. But if it's more of an emergency issue, our operations crews will probably be first responders to assess the situation and determine what repairs may be required.
And Patrick has raised his hand, so I will give him the ability to speak. So you should be able to unmute there, Patrick Sullivan.
There we go. Sorry. So I guess I was naive. I had no idea that the province had any responsibility for the culverts currently. So now that I know, who do I call?
I don't have the number readily available, but you should be able to find on the provincial websites numbers for depots. I think this is the Beachville Depot, if I'm not mistaken. Mark may know. But there should be information on the provincial website for public works.
But nonetheless, if they don't get to it by June, then theoretically you guys would assist with it.
Yes, we would.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, moving to the next written question. This is from Susan Bethune. In the case of water runoff onto St. Margaret's Bay Road because of no ditching, who is responsible?
So we would assess each one of those situations. If it's a case where existing infrastructure needs to be maintained or cleared, that would be Halifax Water coming out to do the work. If it's a case where water is chronically ponding or flooding or running across the road and causing flooding or icing conditions in the weather that we're about to experience, we would participate in an investigation. But if infrastructure needed to be installed, that would be HRM having to undertake that work. But we work closely with HRM staff on assessing which agency needs to take a lead on doing the work. I hope that addresses the question.
And Susan has added another question. Thank you. What do we do currently about this?
So again, currently, the province is responsible for service until June 1st. Neither HRM nor Halifax Water has ability or jurisdiction to do services or to provide service today. So again, I would suggest reaching out to the provincial transportation depot to flag your issue or your concerns. And again, if there's no resolution come June 1st, you can reach out to either of our call centers. Halifax Water's call center is operated 24/7, 365 days a year. And the other thing we want to highlight as part of providing service and communicating closely with HRM, if we see that somebody called our center and it should be going to HRM, we will do what we call a soft transfer and transfer the customer to HRM's call center or HRM staff, so that and we're trying to minimize or eliminate customers getting bounced between call centers. And they should do the same if you call them mistakenly and it is our issue. So we try to resolve a lot of these things behind the scenes and have somebody from either agency get back to anybody with such a complaint or concern about the drainage.
Lisa, your hand is still up. I'm not sure if I mistakenly left it up or if you had another question. Can you let us know?
I do have another question. I did call on January 31st, and I did get a file number because I wasn't sure if it was appropriate for here or not, but I never heard back from anyone. So I will ask. We live on the other side of the street. We're at the corner of Hammond's Plains and Hubley Mill, and we live on the other side of the street, and the culverts are on one side. And all the water, we get water from Hubley Mill and Hammond's Plains running into the ditch, but the culvert comes over to our property, and our property right now is being used as a runoff and pond, so all the water just sits on our properties. Our trees are all dead. We're not paying for stormwater right now. So we've put in a couple issues, but nobody really did anything about it. But if we're going to start having to pay for it, we just really feel that we kind of need to have that looked at and fixed. Plus water comes down our driveway. And is that something that you folks will look at in June?
So a few points there. We have been getting some calls and some emails about provision of service because a lot of people assume that it was happening retroactively. We've been cataloging these, and we've had follow-up meetings with HRM, and with the intention of passing these on to the province, because at this point, as I said, it's not, we're not able to provide service. However, we are keeping that list. And in what you've described, that would entail us going out and doing an investigation,
Right.
looking at where the water is coming from, seeing if there's any issues with the systems that we would own come June, and then also looking at, is there missing infrastructure components and coordinating with HRM if something should be needed to be put in place. There is areas where what we call sheet flow occurs naturally, and it will leave the road and go across property. And then if there's no ditch to collect and convey it. There are a number of different things that may be considered with your property and not being there, seeing it directly when it's happening. But these are some of the things that might be considered. We've seen HRM install asphalt swales on the shoulders to try and direct water.
Yes.
On the severity of what's going on, we've seen them put asphalt lips on the top of the driveways to try and minimize the flow of water into the driveway. So there are a number of things that, as part of the investigation, we would look at before deciding on what the appropriate action is or what we would communicate back to you as part of this.
Okay. Yeah, that would be good if there was something. But thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to jump back to Susan Bethune. She has a related question, a follow-up from previous, but it relates to what you were talking about, Kenda. Adequate grading of gravel roads has an impact on runoff. How will Halifax Water interface with the province on this?
And so if it's a gravel road that HRM is going to take responsibility for in June, HRM will be doing the road maintenance and making sure that their protocols will be to try and get the water to a drainage system. And so I would assume they would take the grading of the gravel roads into consideration and the direction where the water is flowing to try and get it to a ditch system if one exists in that area with that road. And then if there's still drainage issues or problems with the ditch or the culverts, they would engage us as part of the regular process.
All right, and Patrick Sullivan has a hand up, so I will give you access to your microphone, Patrick.
Sorry, I think it was just hanging up there. I put it down a little while ago.
Very good, apologies. I see no other hands, and at the moment we don't have any other typed questions.
Okay, so if there's no other questions or any comments, we appreciate you taking time to come and listen to our presentation and learn a little bit more about stormwater. And we do have, as I said, a number of information and pages on our website to explain stormwater. So if you go to halifaxwater.ca, there's some information there. And there's a specific section in there about stormwater expansion. So I think if you type in some of those keywords on our website, it will get you to the appropriate spot. And any future questions or concerns can be directed that way. And as I said, we will be communicating back with the residents in the community as this process progresses. And I think that is all I have for tonight. And I appreciate your time. And I don't know if Kathy wishes to speak before we sign off.
I just want to thank everyone who took the time out of their schedule this evening to attend the meeting. And thank you, Kenda, for an excellent presentation and doing a good job to really try to thoroughly answer people's questions. Thank you very much.